Hi, I'm Gus Wallen, and this is Not an Overnight Success, brought to you by Shaw & Partners Financial Services. This is a podcast where we sit down with some very successful people from the world of business, entertainment and sport and chat about their life's journey and what got them to the position that they're in today. In today's episode, we are chatting with Kirk Pengilly. Kirk is one of the founding members of INXS, one of Australia's most notorious and successful rock bands. They've sold over 80 million albums worldwide, collected countless awards and trophies for their work from all over the globe, including 3 Grammy nominations, and have been inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame. In this chat, we talk about Kirk's early years and family life, as well as what led him to meeting and forming the band. The story of INXS is one of resilience and incredibly strong friendship. From late night recordings after their work at car yards all day to playing in front of hundreds of thousands of people, INXS certainly was not an overnight success. We speak about the grueling years of touring and churning out music, as well as the tenacious attitude of the band and how often they needed to evolve after events like Michael's death. Kirk has lived a full life and now has found peace in the more simple aspects of life. As for all these podcasts, Shaw & Partners have generously donated $10,000 to the charity of choice of each of our guests. We discuss who that money goes to in this chat. The executive producer of this podcast is Keisha Pettit. Let's get into our chat with Kirk Pengilly. Kurt, how are you, mate?
I am good. Yeah.
Lovely to see you, and thank you for having us in your beautiful home.
Thank you.
What were you like as a kid, brother?
I think I was sort of pretty quiet. I was born in Melbourne, and at the age of 8, we moved to Sydney to a place called Cottage Point, which is a really, you'd call it a remote little village, smack bang in the middle of the Ku-ring-gai National Park. And it's, 10 Ks to civilization, to Terry Hills. We had no electricity. This is in the 60s. As a result of that, as an 8-year-old and onwards, fishing, swimming, boating, bushwalking, it was crap, But
sounds perfect.
But I spent a lot of time alone, except for obviously when I went to school. And then when I was a bit older, started to occasionally have friends come and stay the weekend because we were kind of so cut off. And of course, later on, in early high school, met Tim Farriss and we became best mates and so on. But I think I was a little bit shy, a little bit sort of socially inept, but I wanted that social kind of interaction. I really craved it. And I think that was probably one of the reasons that drew me towards becoming a rock star.
Yeah, of course.
Because I'd meet a lot of people. I reckon I've shaken hands with about 1 million people in my life. So
you didn't do a lot of shaking hands in that first 10 or 15 years, but you made up for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was your family makeup?
Well, I had a mum and a dad. Dad been in advertising, had his own advertising agency in Melbourne, and at the age of 39 decided to retire and sell it and move to Cottage Point, much to mum's and my oldest brother's disgruntlement. So he was very kind of creative in that world, not musically really inclined. And mum was just mum, really. And then I had 2 older brothers, Drew and the oldest brother, Mark.
And were you close to them? Was it a close family? Were you sort of similar in age?
No, there's a fairly big gap, really. I think 4 or maybe close to 5 years between Drew, the next brother. I was an accident. Mum had a miscarriage and then they decided to try again. And apparently the miscarriage was a girl. So I think they treated me a little bit like a girl. I was the girl they didn't have, soft and gentle and but I was closest to Drew. Mark kind of left because he was a lot older. He left home after he went into year 11 and 12 when we moved to Sydney. So he moved out. So didn't see a lot of him after that. Whereas Drew, we've always been really close. But in saying that, Mark was the one that got me into music. His couple of years, his influence up till I was about 10 was massive.
And when you say music, was it you playing certain instruments? Or was it-
Well, he was a drummer in a band. He had a band, and occasionally Dad would let us put the generator on so Mark's band could come and rehearse in the house. And I used to just sit there and watch it in awe and watch them practicing and whatever. And then I think, around the time when he left home, he decided to take up guitar and bought himself a really, nice acoustic guitar and gave me this little beaten up one. And I taught myself guitar on that. I used to just, I don't know how, now when I think about it, it's extraordinary because I literally taught myself. Somehow I must have learned how to tune it. And then I used to play along to songs on the radio and work out the chords.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really weird. I don't know. I must have had a gift for it, which got awakened when my oldest brother gave me this crappy little guitar.
Fantastic. Is that, have you looked back that now and said that's the moment, I suppose, that the journey started for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he used to put on records. I'd have to go to sleep earlier and our rooms were kind of adjoining. It was a weird setup, but anyway, it had like a double door between the rooms right near my bed. So it was like a glass top half that opened up. So he'd put, music on like the Rascals, Gordon Lightfoot, Bob Dylan, Van Morrison, all that sort of stuff. And so I'd drift off to sleep listening to that every night, So it obviously had some kind of influence on me, just music was around me.
What was his band like? I mean, you sat there in awe watching them. Were you like, I just want to dive in there and be a part of it?
I'm not sure really what I thought at that point, but ironically, the guitar player in Mark's band, a guy called Phil Coulson, amazing guitar player, his daughter is Sia.
Oh,
yeah! So
wow!
I know. So there was that connection later on because I met Sia I ran into Phil in King's Cross, I think, when I was living up that way, and he was with Sia, and he introduced me, and she hadn't really even started her journey at that point. It was just that point of reference where you meet someone, and then later on there's this other connection. And
a lot of magic was happening in that room.
Yeah.
So what sort of music did your brother's band play, and what sort of music did you like to listen to once you decided to have your own LPs to listen to?
Yeah, look, I went through all types of things. Obviously, what was happening at the time, I was a big fan of Hendrix and as a guitar player, and then later on I had fads of Deep Purple, Status Quo, Black Sabbath, a lot of kind of hard rock, which I just can't even listen to these days, that sort of stuff. And then later on, definitely much more kind of, I call it muso music, musical stuff like when INXS formed, or the Farris Brothers, we were listening to things like Steely Dan and Little Feat, all stuff that wasn't really that commercial, funnily enough.
Okay.
But Mark's band, I can't really remember what they did a lot of covers. And I do remember Mark taking me with him to a Hoadley's Battle of the Bands, or Battle of the Sounds, I think it was called, in the early 70s, because they had entered themselves into the comp. And I think they came second or something, but I remember that was really eye-opening, going to, I guess it was my first concert, really, a whole lot of bands playing against each other and all that sort of thing.
Well, it sounds like he was a huge part of sort of putting the fire under you to get involved in music. Oh,
absolutely.
If I look back at sort of, me as a 13, 14, 15-year-old at school, doing musicals, in the choir, you know, that type of thing, and we all dreamt of being, rock stars.
Yeah.
So at what point did you start doing your own stuff and start dreaming of perhaps being a rock star?
Yeah, I think when I met Tim, which was in about 1971 or 2, I think it was 71, second year high school, he had a little guitar. He'd just moved from Perth. The Farris Brothers, the family had just moved from Perth to Sydney, and I think it was like third term or something in the science lab, and I walked past the desk he was at, and he had a little guitar drawer in his pencil case. And I was like, yeah, cool, man, We hit it off straight away and just started playing guitar together. And then a little bit later, we found a bass player and a drummer in high school and formed a band called Guinness, named after our bass player's dog. Because I don't think we knew what beer was then.
It was named after the Irish stout.
Yeah, I think so. And at that point, I was starting to write original songs, and I was the lead singer and then, as it turned out, the main songwriter. But we did lots of covers and stuff as well, as all bands do when they start. It was a long time ago.
Do you look back on those at the start, with Guinness and so forth, with fond memories? Do you look back and go, oh, I remember that song we did. I wish,
Absolutely. If I hear some of the covers that I remember that we did, like I think Who'll Stop the Rain by Creedence Clearwater was the first song we did together as a band, and if I hear some of those songs, I just go, oh, yeah.
Do you have a copy of you guys?
I've got some bits of music. Yep. Of course, they're on cassette, so I don't even know if they're playable anymore. I do have a cassette player, though. Recording techniques weren't like they were today.
No.
Today, I should say.
I mean, I remember, for girlfriends, you'd wait for the top 40, you'd hear the love song by Richard Marx or something like that. You'd quickly record it and then...
and then the DJ would talk over the top of it and go,
mate, what are you talking for, brother? So all the way through school, music is your focus, or are you quite academic as well? Are you
not really.
Sporty?
No, look, the whole music thing and Absolutely. I didn't do music in school. I can vaguely read music. None of us could. Really, there's no call for it in modern music. So I didn't do music in school, but certainly, yeah, we were just talking music all the time and introducing each other to new things we've heard and stuff like that. So that was the focus. And I was fairly good in school, but all my report cards, like most people, I think, were, could do more effort. In fact, one that was recurrent was Kirk seems to be away with the birds. Which I think meant that I was always just looking out the window dreaming of stuff, or whatever, not paying attention.
My brother was like that. He got like 80% but effort 3, which meant the minimal.
Yeah.
He could always do better, but he's just going to cruise through. So that's him.
That was pretty much me, I think.
And so you're looking at the birds, thinking about the birds. Are you thinking about what you ended up becoming, or are you just a young kid thinking about a whole lot of other things?
Yeah, look, I think just a young kid. I mean, definitely thinking about music and all that, but just the same as any other kid. I really like that girl, but I'm too scared to go and say something and whatever. And it was difficult for me too, living at Cottage Point. Mum and Dad ended up opening up a restaurant in the house at Cottage Point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they were busy during the days, and I could get a bus to Terry Hills home, but then it was 10K into the national park from there. So I literally, on many occasions, used to walk the 10Ks with my suitcase, because we used to have cases back then. I've still got calluses on my hand from carrying that bag. I don't know why they're still there. It's bizarre. But I would hitchhike as well, because they couldn't pick me up. So imagine that, hitchhiking into a national park.
That's a school
Am I mad?
Yeah, my God.
But that's what happened. Or it would be pouring with rain and I'd just walk home, the 10Ks. And I don't remember it really bothering me. In fact, again, it was the serenity. How's the serenity? Of being just in the national park. And it certainly paved my desire to always have beautiful surroundings, as you can see where we live here over freshwater and, But yeah, it was, I think, as far as, trying to date girls and that, I thought, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to hitchhike out to go on a date, I go to Cottage Point to go on a date.
And hitchhike back to meet Mum and Dad.
Yeah. So it was difficult to have that sort of a relationship and that sort of thing back then. Made up for it later, though.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. Your mum must be a special person to leave what I imagine was sort of like a nice posh lifestyle in Melbourne to live in the middle of the rainforest or the national park.
Yeah, she hated it.
How did they work with your dad just doing what he wanted to do?
Well, yeah, that was just maybe how the hierarchy was those days in that generation, Poor mum. She hated cooking, and then Dad opens a restaurant.
Yeah, like he's giving her a double whammy.
Yeah, totally. So I think
Did they stay together?
Yeah. Yep, all right to the end. And the restaurant ended up getting closed down because I can't say we're in suburbia, but, we had houses next door, and the house next door to us, most of them were holiday houses. They took Mum and Dad to court because they hated the fact that we had the restaurant there. And they found some little loophole in the council zoning and they had to shut it down. So they immediately put the house on the market, and Dad decided to become a farmer. So they bought a couple of 100 acres down in Goulburn, and that was right when I was doing my HSC. And around that Christmas time when our house sold, Dad said, well, you either move to Goulburn or get a job, because they were moving to Goulburn.
Right.
And so
you didn't thought about perhaps letting you have your run into the HSC?
Well, no, I'd done my HSC.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'd done it. It all timed perfectly with that.
Okay.
So, but it was literally, late December or early January, I went down to the employment office down in Brookvale and got a job starting the next day at the car yard at Bill Buckle Autos in Brookvale as a yard boy. And so I moved in with friends that were in Whale Beach and lived there for a couple of years and gradually moved towards the city as I got older.
Yeah. We spoke to Lainey on your wife, Lane Beachley, is obviously a absolute legend and 7-time world surfing champion and so forth. We'll talk about how you met a little bit later, but she did mention, even though how beautiful this is here in Freshie, you do miss at times the buzz of the city.
When I met Lane, I'd been living in Potts Point for probably 12 or 13 years at that point. The buzz of, restaurants and cafes and stuff in walking distance. And it was just a lifestyle, I think, probably in sort of, rebellion to my very kind of quiet life at Cottage Point as a kid. I always craved just stuff, stuff going on and hustle, bustle and noise. So, yeah, we've been in this house here for nearly 14 years, I think. And I still kind of do miss the city buzz and that sort of thing, Although as time's going on, I'm starting to that's waning a bit, which is good.
Yeah. The next stage of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's go back to HSC. You're a Bill Buckle. You, I imagine not exactly being the yard boy.
Oh, I actually loved it.
Okay.
The money, as far as I'm concerned, was good. I think I was earning $112 a week, which, mind you, this is 1976, 77 or whatever. And the used car yard, which it was, the salesmen were just hilarious. They were the classic car salesmen.
Old school.
You can imagine, like dodgy and
lovely.
And always, like if a pretty girl walked into the yard to buy something, they would be fighting to get out there and look after her. It was pretty funny. Lots of funny stories. The most important decision of the day was lunch. So one of my jobs was to travel sometimes, far and wide to go to a restaurant that allegedly has, the best whatever it was, and pick up the takeaway and bring it back to them. And yeah, it was good fun. Good fun. And I just had to, keep the cars clean and make sure they all started and all that sort of thing. And I'd fall asleep, start a bunch of cars up in a row, and then next I'd feel this shaking on my shoulder because I've dozed off to the floor on this car, with it going, and I'd fallen asleep because we'd been rehearsing all night or, whatever. They were really forgiving with all of that. They loved the fact that we had a band. And I ended up getting jobs sort of indirectly for a couple of the other guys in the band as well.
Good on you.
Yeah.
So you're sort of around 20-ish. What's the band at that stage and what are you doing? And are you thinking, look, one day we'll end up, making a living out of this?
Yeah, look, I think without it sounding kind of weird, Tim and I, when we met, hit it off, and we just used to say to each other, we're going to be, bigger than the Beatles. We're going to do this.
Yeah.
And we literally believed it. But the band that I had, that I was the singer in, kind of broke up in, I don't know, I think it was maybe early 77, so a year and a bit after we'd finished high school. And then I just didn't really want to do anything for a while, and it was Tim that maybe 6 months later instigated a kind of jam session with his brothers and also with Michael and Gary and a few other musicians. And that was the start of the Farris Brothers. So that was early 77. And that was a pretty awesome day. I still can vividly remember because we built a little studio in Avalon. So we used to rehearse in there, and we did the little jam session with all the brothers in that place. And I think we worked on about 3 or 4 songs, but there was definitely something special, a chemistry that we all felt that day. And that spurred us on to go, well, let's do something with this. And we did.
You sure did. So what's the next step from such a wonderful day like that? I mean, so many people on the Northern Beaches talk about seeing you guys. Can you believe that we saw them just there, the Antler or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
How long did it take from that moment of those 4 songs and you go, this is something here, through to, we're actually INXS and we are really awesome?
Well, it's where do I start with this? I think, look, we just started rehearsing and we didn't have any gigs or anything. And we ended up finding a place, a factory in Brookvale that a car wholesaler said we could have for like $5 a rehearsal or something, just to pay for the electricity. So we just started rehearsing, and Andrew, the middle of the Farris Brothers, he wrote songs, I wrote songs, and Michael wrote lyrics. And so we just started amassing a set to be able to play live with covers and all that sort of stuff. And we got a few gigs, and Avalon RSL was one of the first ones. And then what happened was John, the youngest of the 3 brothers, he was still in high school, and the Farris family decided to move back to Perth, and therefore John had to go to Perth with them. So we all went, well, we'll go too. So we all left our jobs, our girlfriends and everything else, and moved to Perth for about a year. And we survived, shall we say, maybe 2-3 gigs a week. The problem was Perth was very much a covers band and also probably a hard rock kind of, that's what was predominantly popular, and we weren't doing any of that. So I don't know, somehow we managed to survive and save up enough money then to move back to Sydney. John ended up falling out of school because he was falling asleep in class and all that. So that gave the opportunity for us to all move back to Sydney. And that was in early 79, I think. And we started playing around Manly Vale Hotel, which is no longer there. That was kind of our home ground, whereas the Antler was Midnight Oil's home ground. We started to do gigs, and from there we met Gary Morris, who was Midnight Oil's manager, and he took us on board for a little while. And he's the one who instigated changing the name from what we were called, the Farris Brothers Band, to INXS.
How did they come up with the name?
Well, it's the first thing he said when we went into the first meeting with him was, the name's got to go. It sounded like a circus kind of thing.
What did the Farris brothers think about that?
I think they were pretty, look, we were open to doing whatever it took. And if it means changing the name or whatever. And then he also was very instrumental in he decided to come up with outfits for each of us, like a kind of a trip, shall we say. It's not anything we'd even ever thought of, I think I was still kind of wearing leftover hippie clothes, it was the 70s kind of thing. And never even really thought about dress sense and all that sort of stuff. And so it was Gary that really brought that on. And it was pretty funny. He put 2 or 3 of the guys in white overalls. I had like this blue King G outfit. And poor Timmy had to wear a see-through yellow kind of raincoat suit.
Oh, a bit hot, wouldn't it?
Yeah, pretty hot, plastic. You know? But anyway, we sort of, because he managed Midnight Oil, we did a tour up the East Coast opening for Midnight Oil. They weren't too impressed because, now Gary was dividing his attention with another band and all that sort of thing. But I guess the cruncher with Gary was one day he took us for a ride in his HR Holden, all 7 of us in the car, and we parked up on top of a factory in Brookvale, and he began a spiel of how he'd been to see Billy Graham, the great evangelist, and had become a born-again Christian. And he said, I'm telling you guys that the biggest bands in the world are going to be Christian bands, and you guys have to become Christians. And we just all went, not that we were opposed to it, but we just thought, whoa, hang on a minute, So we parted ways with Gary, and we went sort of crawling to Chris Murphy, who was an agent at the time. He'd booked some of the gigs that we'd done with Midnight Oil and whatever. Tim was kind of managing us, Tim Farris, and he just kept relentingly pushing the idea of Chris managing us. And he didn't want to do it, and eventually he broke. So he took over management, and that was in mid to late 89. And Chris was, mostly on, but on, working with us until he passed away, earlier this year. Yeah,
and an absolute legend. I remember you coming in with him to Triple M many times, and you could just tell the friendship. You've been through so much with all the war stories and so much success. And
he would have taken a bullet for us. He was so passionate and also brilliant guy as far as sort of outside the box thinking and marketing, and we don't have to do it that way. We're going to do it this way. And he ruffled a lot of feathers along the way, probably most of them, but it was just he lived and breathed INXS. And later on, when we brought him back in to sort of look after us, he was super hesitant because he knew that if he committed to working with us again, for him, it's 24/7. It's just blinkers on and off he goes, which it was. And I'd hate to think that lifestyle he led because of that was what ended up participating in passing away. But anyway, he was a great guy. And
he wouldn't have wanted any other way?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. No. So at what point in your life do you go, actually, we're a big deal now?
Yeah.
Is there a moment where you go, wow, we're not just driving around at Brookvale doing bits and bobs?
It's incremental, because we recorded our first album after gigs, like midnight to dawn shift in this studio in Leichhardt, I think it was. And so, we'd do sometimes 3 gigs a night at that point because every pub had bands every night. It was amazing. So we were playing, virtually every night in different pubs around Sydney, and then later on Melbourne and Brisbane, and started travelling. But we did the first album, and it was literally really just going in and recording the songs as we were playing them live. So it was pretty easy. We had a budget of about $5, and so that album came out, and hearing for the first time one of our songs on the radio, that was like, oh, we've made it.
Was it Triple M who played it? Can you remember?
Triple M didn't exist.
Okay.
Because this was 1980, so
it just started. Starting in 80.
Maybe it just started, but no, it was actually we were in Melbourne doing. We used to go to Melbourne stay in a dive hotel for about 3 weeks and do all the pubs in Melbourne, and then we'd drive back in, sometimes the one car back to Sydney and do a few weeks in Sydney, and then go up to Brisbane and drive up there and do a few weeks. And it was a circus life.
Did you love the circus life?
Yeah, absolutely. Every minute of it, and that was the thing. None of it was, well, as I recall, because I loved every bit about it. I think there's, certainly a bit later on, some of the guys in the band didn't like touring and all that sort of stuff, but they didn't get their way because we toured and toured and toured for a decade. But, speaking of tipping point, or when you realise you've made it, I don't know that you ever do, because you're always thinking ahead and thinking, okay, we just achieved that. Now we've got to win the Super Bowl again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But definitely, obviously, around the Kick album, which was released about 10 years after we'd started. So it wasn't like it was an overnight success. But around the Kick album, and it was a crazy time, and so much demand put on us for press and media and appearances and blah, blah, blah. And it was just mental. It was literally every minute was mapped out in our lives as far as a schedule goes and that sort of thing.
So when every minute of every day, is mapped out, all of a sudden you're not doing necessarily the stuff that started the singing. Did you mind all the stuff that happened around singing?
If anything, I would say it was the travel that was the downer, because it's just such a waste of time. When we first went to North America in 83, they have tour buses, and they're a bus with bunks, and they have a front lounge and a rear lounge, and you pretty much live in that bus. There'd be hotels here and there, but quite often it'd be, come off stage, jump on the bus and drive to the next city, which could be 6 hours. It could be sometimes a lot of what we called overnighters, which, you'd be driving sometimes for 15, 16 hours. That part of it was kind of a waste of time, so to speak. Andrew, who pretty soon became the main songwriter, he felt he couldn't write when, with bouncing around in a bus and all that sort of stuff. So for him, he was the one who really hated touring. And I think it was more that. We all loved being on stage, but it was that part of it around it that was a whole chunk of life you never get back,
Just quickly interrupting the episode to say a very big thank you to the sponsor of this podcast, and that is Shaw and Partners Financial Services. Shaw and Partners are an Australian investment and wealth management firm who manage over $28 billion of assets under advice. With 7 offices across Australia, Shaw and Partners act for and on behalf of individuals, institutions, corporates and charities. For more info, you can check out their website at shawandpartners.com.au. That's SHAW for sure. Shaw and Partners Financial Services, your partners in building and preserving wealth. Now let's get back into the episode.
So rock and roll people go, right, okay, I want to be a rock and roll star.
Yeah.
I want the, if you're a bloke, you want the girls, you want the parties and that sort of stuff. How much of being a part of INXS was that type of thing?
You're trying to dig up the dirt. Look, there was a part of it, but we realised early on that every night mattered and that we had to be at our best every night. So we slipped here and there, but predominantly we were pretty good kids in the early days. Later on, when we'd sort of realise, okay, when we got to the point of doing sort of stadiums and stuff around the world, you can't do night after night. So, and in the bigger cities, there'd always be parties because there'd be record companies throwing a party for you and blah, blah, blah. But, well, for me anyway, I can't vouch for the other guys completely, but I'm really anal about time and being on time and being ready and prepared and all that sort of stuff. I drive Lane mad because she's the opposite. Yeah. So, I would know what my curfew should be and that sort of thing, so that I'd get enough sleep and have enough time to pack in the morning to get on whatever mode of transport we were travelling on for that day and that sort of thing. Sometimes, but
I mean, you can't be perfect.
Yeah. But look, all of it was a lot of fun. It really was. And it was, we were so passionate about what we were doing and all that sort of stuff. So for me, at the time, none of it was bad. I just enjoyed it all.
Oh, yeah. Sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
What was the greatest couple of gigs you ever played? Like those moments where you're on stage and you are doing what you do and you just go, I'm literally the king of the world right now. Like Michael's just over there. I've got my mates over here.
Yeah.
And we are playing Wembley or whatever it might be.
I'm not sure that I ever thought I was king of the world, but Michael might have.
Yeah.
But look, there were so many great shows along the way. One of the first that came to mind was, I think it was in about 85 or 86, we did a special performance down in Melbourne with a bunch of other bands, Australian bands, for Prince Charles and Princess Di. And we got to meet them after and all that.
Was she as beautiful as we expect?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, just glowed aura. But that was a really kind of special a special gig kind of thing, and we recorded that night as well. I loved, I think, the South American gigs in general. We were the first international act to play in Argentina ever in 84 at a stadium there, and we were the first international band to play in Mexico City. I think it was 91. No outside band had been allowed into Mexico City after the Doors had played there in the 60s, and obviously I never found out really what happened, but they banned international acts. So we were the first allowed in to Mexico City in 91. So we ended up doing a lot of touring through South America, and in some respects really opened the doors to other acts to go there and tour. We headlined Rock in Rio that same year that we played Mexico, which was amazing, 160,000 people.
Wow.
And yeah, it's incredible because it's just, you'd end up not really seeing any single person because it's just a sea of people.
As far as the eye can see.
Yeah, and actually another one that was really interesting was at the end of our first ever tour of North America, opening up for Adam Ant in 83. We did the US Festival in California, which was put on by the two guys that started Apple Computer. And it was a 3-day outdoor festival. We were the second band on, and we got an encore. So we were just like, that was the point of like, we've made it.
Yeah.
Because none of the opening acts normally are even allowed to do an encore, but we got an encore, and there was allegedly 250,000 people there over the course of the weekend. And it was on a gentle sloping hill, like out in somewhere in California. About halfway up, the audience disappeared into the smog. So we couldn't see the back half of the audience because of the smog.
Wow.
The LA smog kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. But that was a really memorable gig too, It was so important for us to just go on stage. And because we'd had hundreds of gigs under our belt from the pub scene in Australia, we had sort of we had a one-up on most other international acts because they didn't have that upbringing, shall we say, of, playing every night for a couple of years, which is what we did in the pubs here.
You were fit.
Ready and raring, and we were a machine, on stage. And quite often it was always said that blew the main act off stage and blah, blah, blah. But there was sort of proof in the pudding that night because we got an encore.
That's so great. The one thing that I wanted to talk to you about now quickly was the TV show and the sort of...
Oh, yeah, yep.
Because I've got 3 kids, 22, 20 and 18, and they've got the Kick album in their Spotify playlist, and all of a sudden a whole lot of people went, God, this INXS is pretty good. And we're like, we were there when it first happened, kids. And it's like they were coming back to us going, oh, there's this band called, and Midnight Oil, the same thing, and Dragon, and a lot of Aussie rock and roll bands are now in the Spotify lists of our kids.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, really? I don't know why that is. I put it down to, in some respects, one, got to be great songs, but I think it was real musicians playing real instruments, and there's something about that, I think. I love a lot of current music and that sort of thing too, but yeah, it was just different. I think there was a lot more point of differences too between all the different bands. That was how you made it. You had to have some kind of point of difference to the next guys or whatever. Yeah, it is interesting, but Rockstar, that came about, obviously, Michael, our original singer, passed away in 97. We were obviously gutted and thought, well, that's it. Our career's over. We've lost our front man and, it's irreplaceable and all that. And it was actually Jimmy Barnes that we were in the studio maybe a year later, I think, going through all our old tapes, listening to see if we had any songs that we hadn't released and maybe we can do something with them and whatever. And Jimmy called up, won't even try to do Jimmy's sort of shouting Scottish accent, but but he basically shouted down the phone at us, I want you guys to play Mushroom Records are having a 25th anniversary, and we'd recorded one song with Jimmy, Good Times, a few years prior, and when Michael was alive, and that had been released on Mushroom. And so he said, I want you guys to perform with me at this concert in Melbourne for this 25th anniversary. And we ummed and ahed a bit, and then we thought, oh, what the heck? And so we did it, and we rehearsed 3 or 4 songs, I think, and played at the gig in Melbourne, and the crowd reaction was shocking, astounding. We just didn't expect it to get such an amazing reaction. And so that sort of spurred the idea on that, well, okay, we're still INXS. We still sound like INXS. We just got to find the right singer. So through a process of a bunch of different things that happened, we ended up approaching John Stevens, and he sang with us for about 3-4 years, I think. And it was, I owe so much to John for doing that, because it really put our faith back in us and brought us out of our hole that we'd kind of dug and helped us realise that, yes, we could continue and whatever. Unfortunately, it didn't really move forward with new material, and so we kind of decided that, well, we're going to try something else now or whatever. And so the idea of doing a TV show to do an international search for a new singer, we thought we could get someone known. We're always going to face the comparison situation where we're going to compare them to Michael and whatever. So we thought, well, let's try and find a diamond in the rough, someone unknown. So we teamed up with Mark Burnett, who was at that time kind of reality show king behind The Apprentice and Survivor and all these sorts of shows. And so we teamed up with Mark to do the production of it. And Tim and I set off around the world going to auditions in all the major cities around the world, which was a long other story in itself, because some of them were just like, oh my God, how are we going to find someone?
Were you
in
New
York?
The comparisons though in your own head too?
No, I think there was definitely a bunch of us in the band that were going, we need a female singer, because then there's not the comparisons, or we need to be that sort of radical with it. So we were looking at men and women, of course, but I'll never forget in New York, I don't know if the ad in the paper had sort of read incorrectly, but we got a whole bunch of, Broadway kind of peeps come down and sing for us. And it was just like, Tim and I were just like, oh, we're going to die. This is it. This is the end.
Trying to be polite a bit.
Yeah, this is the end of our career. Like, no way.
Listen, like,
yeah. Oh, it was horrible. But there was some great ones there as well. But it was just funny that we got sort of all these kind of Broadway sort of trained people. Anyway, trying to cut it short, but we so we went and did the TV show and was on Foxtel here, which we were a little bit disappointed with, only because Foxtel was not that big then. This was in 2005, so
we're about 20% of the
if that maybe. But at least in America, it was on CBS and it was on other big networks around the world. Extremely nerve-wracking, extremely risky to do, and lots of heated discussions with Mark Burnett about how we need to do this, and fights over. He wanted the stage set to be in the shape of a guitar with a thing going. It's like, it's not country music awards, you can't do this, and had to fight with him to make it, look like a club and get the audience right down the front. So it was like a gig, which none of the other shows like Idol and stuff were doing back then. We had a real rock band that was the backing band, really primo musicians, well known. Like the music director was the music director for people like Cher and also, they're all big gun musicians. In fact, it was intimidating for us to have to get up and play at one point in the show because they are so amazing. All this band, this house band, as we call them, But anyway, it was a very interesting journey and very, out of our comfort zone and all that. And we ended up with the guy that we all said at the start, there's no way he's going to be our singer. But he ended up being the one that sort of had all the goods as far as charisma and a bit dangerous and a bit unpredictable. And he had a great voice and all that sort of stuff. So he seemed to be the one that wanted it the most as well. So we ended up picking JD Fortune and straight away went in and recorded the album that we did with him, Switch, in about 3 weeks, I think, and then went on tour.
And did you love that experience?
Yeah, it was great at first, but then it kind of got difficult. I think, look, he was a guy that was allegedly living in his car boot before entering into the show, and I think that sort of from a car boot to selling out arenas in North America and Australia and all that sort of thing was a massive ask for a young guy without the experience that, that we'd had and all that sort of thing. For us, it was just, it's another gig, but for him, it was
life-changing.
Yeah, totally life-changing. And so then he didn't handle it pretty much. I think he just found, it was obviously too much for him. And so after about 18 months, I think, close to 2 years, we said, look, we're going to stop for a while and we'll think about what we do next and all that. We did end up, a couple of years later when we brought Chris Murphy back on, did end up doing some more gigs with JD for a while there, and then we decided that was enough, either time to do something different or to pull the plug on it sort of thing.
Where are you now? Where are you now in your own life? And obviously beautiful house here. You love Lainey. You've been together for a long time. You're like soulmates.
Absolutely.
What's the future look like for you?
Well, look, I'm kind of, I guess I'm retired. I'm 63.
Gee, you don't look 63. No, do you look really good?
You can come back.
Yeah.
I love my simple life. I'm the housewife. I do the cooking and mostly the washing and all that sort of stuff. It's all the stuff I wasn't able to do in my previous life where I was just always on tour. I couldn't cook in my hotel room, although I did attempt to a few times. But all that simple stuff, I'm just loving it. Australia is just a wonderful place to live, and I've got other passions now. I haven't really announced it yet, but I've bought out a rosé.
I actually had a bottle. Lainey gave me a bottle a couple of weeks ago, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm actually working on marketing my very small batch of rosé and just trying to get it into a few restaurants and get it going and see what happens. So that's taken up quite a bit of time in the last 12 months or so. And for decades, I've gambled heavily on the stock market, which I still do. I love that. Just really enjoy.
So is that you with a laptop in the mornings?
Yep.
Going through stuff, doing your own calls?
Some of it, yeah. I trade on, an online platform, as well as I do have a stockbroker company that I've been with for 20 years, I think. Different stockbrokers have looked after me as time's gone on. Yeah. They come and go. But yeah, I really enjoy that. And up until recently, Lane and I found a little cottage at Cottage Point. We sold it at the beginning of this year, but we had it for about 5 or 6 years. So I always wanted to go back there, and we found this little cottage for sale and Airbnb'd it. So I managed that, which was a freaking nightmare. I'll never do that again. It was me that instigated selling it because I just couldn't cope. I got so busy in 2020, obviously with people not being able to go overseas and fastidious with how it was set up, and it's a fully sort of stocked kitchen, not so much food, but making sure that, there was all the teas and the coffees and the sugar and the salt and pepper shakers were filled, and, it's nuts. And then, there were a few times where I was cleaning the toilet going, is this where I wanted to end up?
Yeah. Was I playing in front of 250,000 people?
And here I am leaning over a toilet bowl. So it was a bit of, it was an interesting time, but it was a lot of maintenance to the property and all that sort of stuff, and setting it up for when guests come, and then checking that things hadn't been broken, or, it's just like, what am I doing? You don't need to do this. And so anyway, we sold it in February, but that took up a lot of time in the last 5 or 6 years up until we sold it as well. So I'm actually just basking in sort of, sunlight of not having any sort of commitments like that now. And not that we've been able to go anywhere for, on and off for the last 18 months anyway. It's just been nice having a simple life and not having to be anywhere and kind of do anything other than cook and drink wine and
just be with Lainey.
and just be with Lane.
That's pretty cool. I'd like to do that. That sounds a pretty good life.
I have had an amazing life. I'm totally grateful and humbled by everything that's occurred in it. So very, very fortunate.
Do you ever just slip on an album and listen to?
Never. No, I don't. I don't listen to our music, INXS music, unless something's happening and I need to have a listen to a new mix of something or whatever. I don't actually do anything sort of musically now. I've just decided I did everything I could have possibly have wanted to do. I was never a campfire guy sitting around strumming my acoustic guitar anyway. When I was a kid I was, but when we became professional and all that, some of our tours went for like 8 months around the world, and the last thing I'd want to do when I got home was, hey, honey, can I sing you a song? Kumbaya. Never.
A bit of American Pie.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so I just switch on and switch off, and now I've kind of switched off. So I do have a guitar downstairs, but it's not often I pick it up and play it, and I don't regret that at all.
Do people ask you at dinner parties? They go, "Oh, mate, could you just
mate, rip a tune out?" I've done a few weddings and
for close friends.
Yeah, I was doing corporate gigs, Q&A only, and then if they pay a bit more, I'd sing a couple of songs for them. But of course, that's all been sort of shut down in the last 18 months, and I won't do it on Zoom because I've done a few of those on Zoom. But unless the sound's set up properly and all that, I'm not willing to risk singing a couple of songs.
No, fair enough.
But yeah, it's just, as I said, the simple life is good after such a complicated life. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good on you. I love that. Let's finish off with the top 5 questions. Your favourite...
Is this like the first word?
No, this is really easy.
It's like a psychiatry,
Yeah, look in my eyes.
Yeah, that's the first word that comes into your head.
Your favourite holiday destination?
Ooh. Well, I'll go with whatever first comes into your mind. Definitely the homestead at El Questro in Western Australia, nearly Northern Territory, but Western Australia. Most amazing place I've ever been to. It's built on the top of a gorge, and in a couple of the rooms, you go out into your balcony and you're looking down into the gorge where there's crocodiles swimming around, and you can throw like bread off the veranda and the crocodiles swim over to the bread and eat it. And it's extremely pricey, and it's one of those all-inclusive kind of things, but it's just the whole property is amazing. I love rainforests and waterfalls and all that sort of unicorns and rainbows, and whereas Lane likes surf the bigger the better sort of thing. So we kind of, again, we're quite opposite in a lot of those ways. But yeah, to me that place is heaven, and there's all sorts of things you can do there. It's just a magical spot.
Sounds great. Are you a reader? Have you got a favourite book?
I am an avid reader, and I'm a Kindle guy because I read so much that I couldn't have books. You wouldn't be able to sit in this room. And as far as favourite books goes, not really, but I didn't read at all after my school years, really. I didn't read predominantly at all. And then maybe 10 years ago, I picked up this book called Clan of the Cave Bears. I think it might even be partially a children's book. I don't know, but the fascination to me was it was about kind of where Neanderthal man meets caveman kind of thing, that transition that must have happened when man jumped a notch intelligently wise. And it's about this girl that gets orphaned and picked up by the cave dwellers, and she's different and all that sort of thing. I just found it fascinating. So from that point on, I just started reading again. Yeah, and
Got the fire in the belly again.
Yeah, I did. I love it.
Good on you.
It's the last thing I do before I go to sleep. So
yeah, best way to go to sleep, I reckon.
Yeah.
Have you got a quote or a saying, something that you live your life by, or someone said something to you one day and you went, "Oh, yeah, well, that makes sense to me"?
Again, first thing that comes in, keep it as a hobby. That was what my father told me through my whole childhood when I was living at home and trying to teach myself guitar, and then got a band. And Dad always said, keep it as a hobby. You have to get a real job. And funnily enough, many years later, I think it was our 4th or 5th album, it had gone platinum or whatever here in Australia, and the record company said, "Oh, do you guys want like a plaque made, the platinum record plaque thing made for family members or anyone that's special, Chris Murphy."
Yeah.
He got one anyway.
Yeah.
But so I said, yeah, I want one for Mum and Dad, and on it I put in inverted commas, keep it as a hobby. And Dad got pride of place, and Dad just loved it.
I bet.
Because he got it, he got it. But that was his saying, keep it as a hobby.
I think that is beautiful. I could just imagine his face. Favorite movie?
So many that mean a lot, because we used to sit on the bus touring around America just watching movies all the time, VHS videos.
Yeah.
There's some of those movies that we just watched over and over again, like Caddyshack. There was a whole lot of them, really. But one of my favorite movies, and I just don't know why it gets to me, it's called The Prestige. It's got Michael Caine.
I think Hugh Jackman.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think David Bowie plays a little part in that as
plays,
well. Yeah.
Nikola Tesla. But I just found it just such a fascinating concept. And it's about, two competing magicians in the early 1900s trying to outdo each other sort of thing. But it's really dark and really kind of, I don't know, it's almost believable. And especially there's one of the characters, as you said, David Bowie plays Nikola Tesla, who is probably my all-time, he'd be my first person I would say at a dinner table, like who would you like at a dinner table?
Yeah.
Fascinating inventor. And literally if we'd gone with his forward thinking instead of Edison's, we'd be living in a different world and a much better world power-wise for a start. He was a genius. Anyway, he impacts quite heavily in the story as well, in The Prestige. So, yeah, I love that movie.
Beautiful. Final question, and most importantly, and I know that you've got a charity very close to your heart, Shaw and Partners, who are sponsoring this podcast, are giving $10,000 to all our guests to give away to a charity of your choice. So I know you've spoken about it on Triple M many times.
Yeah.
Could you tell us, who you're going to give to and what will they do with 10 grand?
Yeah. Well, yes, I'm currently an ambassador for Glaucoma Australia, but I don't think I'll pick them.
Okay, great.
They're going to hate me. And the only reason I say that is that there's a couple of organisations out there that look after musos and stuff if they've been in accidents or they're retired, and also there's one for crew guys, drive around in the trucks and set up the band gear all the time, and they don't have a life. And, if they get injured, they're not skilled in anything else. What do? So I think probably both those charities, I'll split it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get the names of those and make sure they get that $5,000. And if you've heard the Lane Beachley podcast, you've heard the love story and how that all happened, which is why we didn't go into it with Kurt. But thank you so much. There's so much we could have got to that we haven't because of time. But thanks so much for your time.
I will tell a different side to the story.
Oh, will you now? Well, she said that she wasn't interested and that you're all over her like a chick.
No. Such a liar, that girl. Don't believe anything that comes out of her mouth. No, she was right. Both of us were not interested at all. And the first date was a disaster, and probably is a similar story, although when we do tell it, we always interrupt each other and say, no, that's not.
That's not how I remember
it. How does that happen?
Yeah.
You're both there, but...
Well, the thing is that you're still together now all these years on, and that's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Looking after each other and loving each other. So thanks for your time, mate.
Thank you.
That was Kirk Pengilly. What a humble and grounded guy. What I loved about him was just how relaxed he was, and the fact when I said to him, when did you realise you're a success? It wasn't that moment at Wembley in front of hundreds of thousands. It was purely just knowing right from the start that they had something really, really special. And that episode of Kirk was our last episode of Season 1 of Not an Overnight Success. But we've got some great news. Thanks to all of your feedback, we are going to be back with another season. Another 10 incredible people from the world of business, entertainment and sport, talking about how they became the successes that they are. We'll be chatting with the likes of Twiggy Forrest, Deborah Lee Finesse, Lisa Wilkinson, and many more. It'll also be another $100,000 going to various charities, all thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Shaw and Partners Financial Services, who have generously supported this podcast and also donated $10,000 to the